why it's the first agenda item.
Yeah, I mean, I logged in. I didn't hit the live button. That was my bad.
That's fine. They don't need to see 5 minutes of people just sitting around. Cool. Thank you for doing that, Javier.
Yeah.
New faces. Go ahead. What were you saying? Cool. New faces. Everyone here is either maintainer on the core team, so I think none of those are new faces. Let's start with outstanding spec PRs. Continuing this trend of a decent amount of spec activity, so that's cool. I will share my screen. Awesome. So, okay, so for these draft things, we still need to open up a PR into the RFC's repo to put or close, I think, the asset package RFC before it gets closing these drafts from, I guess, Ben/Daniel. For release, I went ahead and split out the thing into contributing MD that Emily suggested, and then kind of just waiting on approvals from Ben/Steven. I assume Emily approves her own PR. But yeah, you never know.
We're getting around the vote problem, continuing to get around the vote problem, thanks to Emily.
Yeah. But I don't know. I don't think anything in here is super controversial. I think one of the suggestions I had at one point was just to help shepherd some of the spec releases along to point release managers, but I don't know if we need to necessarily do that. And we can come back to that at a later point. I think Emily was mostly documenting what she was doing today or before she left. So I'm happy to just kind of take that as is, and then we can iterate on it as we want. So Ben and Steven, if you want to approve or have any outstanding feedback. I feel like this has been open since right before she left. So yeah, a little while.
Okay.
Onto distribution artifact, bill pack artifact format. Cool. I feel like kind of how are you feeling about this one, Stephen? Kind of changes some of the bill package stuff. I think we've discussed most of the things.
Yeah.
Are we okay merging this into 0.3?
This.
Do you want to look at it again?
I think I looked at this before. This looks okay to me. Yes. I will approve soon. This was. Who is this?
This was Jamil. One of the. What's the right terminology here, Javier? Is it intern?
They call them mentees.
Mentees, yeah.
Got it. Yep. I looked over this earlier. I will give it one more pass and approve.
Okay. When you approve, do you want to just merge it in, Stephen?
Sure.
Because I don't think there's any, unless you have like stuff you want changed or something. If you are +1 and there isn't any other changes, do you want to merge that in instead of kind of having to wait a cycle for it to be next week?
Is there a special process for merging spec PRs that's not hit the button on GitHub, or is there anything like what we do for RFCs, or can you use GitHub interface for it?
You should be able to just hit the merge button.
Cool.
And the only thing to check, which it is, I already did it, it should be in this kind of 0.3 branch. And then kind of, I think we have milestones for all that stuff, but I can make sure all the other stuff that is not click the button is set up. So you should just be able to hit the button once you review.
Sounds good.
Life cycle distribution spec. Okay.
So
What's-
I feel like this one's pretty much ready as well. I did tag Natalie as a reviewer since it has to do with a process that they're currently doing that might have some impact to it. But otherwise, I think it's pretty straightforward.
From last week, this was the one related to like the tarball and the OCI image layout discussion, right?
Yes, and we did incorporate that, as you can see there on line 82. We basically use the same phrasing that we used for build packages.
Is this just a life cycle package? I guess it doesn't flow off the tongue as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's the lifecycle artifact and how you distribute it. I'm not sure that it requires an additional name in this format.
And then you were fine with that, I think, Natalie, yes? The OCI tar, even though that
Yeah.
requires some potential changes if we want to distribute it that way on GitHub.
Yeah, we hashed that out last week.
Cool. Cool. Yeah, I think that all looks good to me. I will add Ben and Steven and Joe, I guess. Does anything stand out to you, Stephen, on this thing? I think we discussed it mostly last week, so I don't imagine anything, but
I just haven't gotten around to hitting the button yet.
cool.
I can also merge it if we have consensus other than
Yeah, I think
waiting for Joe.
I think with Ben, in theory, we have enough. If you vote in, that's how the rules work. Or we need, without Emily, we need Joe as well.
Yeah, we need both.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I can ping Joe about it. Or we can ping Joe in leadership as well, as a follow-up action item. But I think I think Javier said he's like past halfway, so it would be nice to kind of get this in place so we can actually do the non-spec work. Cool. Did you want to talk about the draft build image stuff, Javier?
Yeah, if you don't mind, there is an open question that I think, Steven, since you're here, you might be able to answer. But it basically has to do with the CNB, CNB underscore targets, environment variables. I think there's still some confusion on that. But I just want to make sure that it isn't something that is, embedded or baked into the build image, right? Those CNB target variables. But the RFC also says that they're not passed through the platform environment variables. And I guess maybe just some clarification on how those environment variables are derived and who's the one that actually sets their values.
It's an identifier that is provided dynamically at build time that's in run image metadata that lets the build pack know this is it's optional, but lets the build pack know this is a special kind of run image, right? It looks like this. Like an example would be you have a version of Ubuntu Bionic that has some special modifications to it. You want to indicate to build packs that it is this particular revision of this image, right? So it's not baked into the build image. It comes from the run image, and it's not provided through the platform directory. That's all. That was the comment, because CNB underscore environment variables are always set directly in the environment because they don't have the same security related issue that user provided environment variables that come into the platform directory do.
So, but practically, from a practical standpoint, it would be the lifecycle that retrieves that information from the run image selected.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Bingo.
That's it. So then it wouldn't be part of this RC. So this RC should, or sorry, this PR should be good and should not be a draft. So again, I guess, Steven, since you're kind of looking at all these, this would be another one, if you don't mind adding to your list.
This draft.
Yeah, undrafted. Yeah, because that was the only outstanding thing that I could see. Otherwise, the build image is pretty simple now that stacks aren't there.
Do we need to point this to not made?
Yeah,
Uh,
to
distribution
distribution.
03.
Yeah, yeah, I noticed that as well.
Wait, where's this branch in here? Okay. Hopefully this doesn't break everything. Nice.
Not too terrible.
Cool. Yeah, I will try to. I'll make sure to get to this before I head out as well, so you're not blocked by me. Cool. And then this is Joe starting work on the Docfile support RFC spec. And then, okay. Are you saying I need to create a platform 08 branch, Natalie? Cool. I can also do that today. Is there anything you want to talk about for this spec PR besides please take a look?
I would just say that it's sort of, at least the way I wrote it, it's dependent on there being stuff in the build pack spec that describes SBOM, and I'm still working on that part. So maybe take those two together. I hope to get the other PR up soon.
Okay.
Is this associated to an RC? Sorry, Terrence.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I should associate it with, I think it's 95. Don't know if anybody. Let's see.
I do not have the RFC numbers memorized in my head.
It's
reference that.
95.
Okay.
The issue's number 256.
Cool.
Oh, also, can we make a platform 08 branch? I don't.
Yeah,
think-
that's what I was saying, that I need to go ahead and, well, I guess it doesn't have to be me, but I was planning on going ahead and doing that, I guess, in accordance to the release stuff that Emily left us. Cool. On to release planning milestones. So we have a platform 08, yes, that goes into. Okay. Cool. Anything that is coming out? Are we closing this builder 0.1 stuff? feel like there was discussion from last week about we were not going to release a builder extension.
Yeah, I'd be in favor of that, but I don't know what the logistics behind that are. Is it just as simple as closing that milestone? Or do we have to do anything with the I guess we never released extension spec for it, so there's just a random.
Yeah, we never actually cut it,
Yeah,
so it has been released out. But are we moving it? We're moving it to platform. Was that the plan?
We're moving it to distribution.
Distribution.
Yeah.
So is this going to be part of distribution 03 then?
Yeah, that's all the work that we're doing right now with Jamil, is he's defining all the components to then say all these components or a subset of them are considered a builder, and the builder has this.
Are you also handling this issue that Natalie opened? Or is this not relevant?
No, but we can try. We could.
Can I move this into distribution 03 for now?
Let's do that. From a
And-
strategy standpoint, I think that makes sense.
Yeah. And then if we're not doing that, I will then just close builder 01 if that is cool with the rest of the core team here. Should have nothing in it. Cool.
What is the closed item?
It was Daniel's or David's original kind of PR, I guess.
But that got merged in, right? Yeah.
Yeah. That was like the actual original kind of thing.
Got it.
Maybe change the title slightly to imply that it was never released.
Was this archived?
That works for me.
Do I have to, can I hit close or have to hit save first? Do you know?
Pretty sure you can hit close straight off there.
Cool. And I'll just mark that date. Cool. Awesome. Should we move on to RFCs? Cool. So I think this is still blocked, right? From the spike work. Support Docker files, I think, is moving along, and Joe has started work on basically just figuring out how to actually spec all this stuff, which is here. Officially supported build packs. I think Joe was making some updates to this, and I had not checked if he already kind of. Cool, yeah. So it looks like basically Sam and I probably just need to re-review this. And then we should be good there. Yeah. This is blocked on this getting in. Doesn't look like there's any changes to this, so still waiting on some work there. There's a bunch of discussion last week on this on Friday. Are there any changes we want to make to this RFC related to that?
I think I was going to propose some changes, but I haven't gotten around to it.
Okay. And then this is kind of Anthony's RFC on adding the SBOM to the run image. This was cut from Stephen or Sam's RFC, I think. Sam's RFC. That was scope. Any of these particular ones we want to talk about for tomorrow?
It might be good to bring up the run image SBOM again. I don't think it's required to achieve a complete SBOM, but it'd be good to standardize on what label run images should use to represent their SBOM so that they don't create too much divergence. I think we're really close to complete SBOM, scannable SBOM for build pack images, which is pretty exciting.
There's something from that you were talking about cutting scope on that you were thinking about adding in, but it didn't actually wasn't originally in the RFC. Is that still true?
Yeah, I think this is that thing that we the original RFC cut scope is saying specifying where the base image SBOM, how that should be specified in the run image and thus in the resulting image as it carries forward. And so I think it also didn't clarify, like, when you do the rebase, you need to move the run image SBOM from the new run image over to the old one and not just move the layers over, right? So that's a good thing to clarify. And so this covers that gap that wasn't specified in the original version, but is inferable. And it doesn't really, because you can always, whatever you put in the run image ends up in the final image, right? And, you can use whatever format or whatever label for identifying that you would like to. This just standardizes it.
Gotcha.
So it'd be good to get this through, just to clarify some of that stuff.
Cool. Anything else? Just the run image stuff?
Is there, I know there's been a lot of talk about project descriptor in general, like what the best path forward for project descriptor is. That's kind of come up again, from a like more existential, in a more existential sense with, is a project descriptor we have now too widely scoped and not enough of an advertisement for the project? I don't know if Joe's talked to you, Terrence, about this. There's some conversations in Slack. That might be a good topic for tomorrow also, because I think that's, imminent.
Yeah, I saw some stuff. Javier mentioned some stuff on Friday when we met, but I've not synced up with Joe. I think Javier and I are supposed to get together to deal with some stuff there.
Cool.
Yeah, I mostly just saw notes as well in the office hours, I think.
It might be the type of thing where if we have ideas, we could run them by kind of a larger group of people and see how the community feels about it. That's why I was thinking about it for working group, like see how people feel about Project Toml, a more generic thing versus something that's more, pack Toml, whatever you want to call it. It's more project specific, get some feedback. But whatever you think, it's just an idea.
Yeah, I think if I recall where in my mind we are with that is there's a converter RFC that we want to definitely take advantage of. I think from my side, it's helping with some of the interface on how the platform's going to interact with it and what it expects back. But how that ties to more or less the separation of the project descriptor and maybe rebranding it to be more user-centric. And we talked about a little bit of the idea of application API.
Sorry, I don't want to cut you off, but I'm not actually talking about the interface for how you consume the descriptor or the converter process or how we version APIs. I think that's one whole unit of stuff to talk about. There's like a little bit of a different conversation that's like is more of a design question about Project Toml seeming like it's scoped to try to solve a problem that's kind of far outside of the project. There's some threads in Slack that are kind of talking about that idea. Do we need do we need a second version of the application descriptor, given kind of the usage and feedback and how platforms have adopted the current version and how we're feeling at this point? Sort of a separate conversation for what the API should look like and what it would look like to make changes to it, if that makes sense. Like, should we do something?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting to, where a lot of the conversation we've had thus far and resolved was the backend side of things. But yeah, for the front end, I believe the next steps were Terrence and I were going to propose something that might be radically different, that's more tailored to the app developer, right? And keeping it in that sort of vein at that layer, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sorry, I shouldn't cut you off.
No,
Do we feel like that's something we're ready to talk about? Like, would it be good to just start talking about it, or do you want to come to the table with like a straw man proposal first?
I think if we have a large enough audience, it would be interesting to get different people's takes before we invest too much time in bringing in this like maybe radical idea that people may not be fond of to begin with. But yeah, for me, it sounded like we were already aligning towards it. So again, I think it's worth it.
Cool. Well, I mean, I am happy either way. I just know config files seem to be the ultimate technical bike shed. So if it doesn't get reined in, it can kind of spiral out, I feel like. But do you want to lead or do that, Stephen or Javier? Is that a thing you want to talk about tomorrow, or?
Sure. I mean, if people feel like it's a good time to talk about it, I can see what people think. I had one more for tomorrow also. Charles is working through, I think he's on PTO for a couple of weeks, but he's working through a proof of concept of Docker file support. And I think it's right in the middle of two solutions. I think he's working on a version of it that is probably not usable locally in Pack and also not usable in an environment like Tecton, right? And the way I'd imagine this is maybe there are two implementations, one provide a purely user space, one provided by the lifecycle, and a purely Docker daemon or Podman compatible, also one provided by Pack as a place to start. And I don't think Charles is going to be there tomorrow, but we could talk about those two options, some of the semantics, and then see if anybody disagrees that that's not a good path forward. So I put the support Docker files RFC on there again, which is still not merged. We should figure that out too.
Yeah, I think we're just trying to work through. Joe's ready, starting to work on the basically figuring out how to spec it all out. So it's moving forward as far as I know. So I don't know if you had a chance to kind of look at that spec PR, Stephen.
I have not yet. I didn't know you opened it. I will take a look.
Yeah, it's a draft because I think it's still work in progress, but it is linked. So if you just go to the RFC, or I mean, you can easily find it, but it's at the bottom as like the most recent update down here.
Awesome, that's great stuff.
So I think you'd be interested in what that looked like, but cool. Do you have a preference in order? I was thinking run image SBOM, the support Docker file, and then the most bike chat topic at the end.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Cool.
All right, can we just talk about the two paths again? You know, I believe we were all in the group at one point in time, just to make sure this conversation is moving along. We said, you know, for the proof of concept, we were just trying to get the fastest thing out, which might, you know, be something in the life cycle, just to see that it even works and suss out any possible forks in the road, right? But ultimately, maybe this should fall on the platform side, right? I just want to make sure when we go to this conversation tomorrow, we haven't lost the previous conversation that we've had about it, when I believe some of us were in on this.
I think my concern is that Charles is looking for a path forward, and he's using some tools that mix user space and privileged operations, like you know, they require user namespacing inside of the container, and so it kind of looks like stuff on both sides. It's okay if he wants to kind of figure out some of the hard problems in that implementation, make it working, and get that working, right? But I worry that he's going to have to solve a lot of hard problems that he wouldn't have to solve if he picked one of the two kind of easier options. Does that sort of make sense? And maybe I'm missing a conversation that happened about what the proof of concept should look like. And, you know, I don't go to all the sub-team meetings.
It makes sense. Thanks.
I don't think it'd be about making decisions. Just talk about those two options and see if they're, they seem like they're reasonable.
Cool. Sounds like the discussion tomorrow will be good on that. Anything else before we call it for today?
There were some more agenda items, I think. Did we want to talk about spec repo organization, or do we want to move to the leadership one?
What is SIFT SBOM? I guess that topic.
I put in an issue. This is just informative. I put in an issue into life cycle. So for some context, in Sam's SBOM RFC, we said we're not going to pick winners for SBOM. We'll just support a whole bunch of different SBOM media types. I put in and also we said that new media types don't require an RFC. I'll just add them to the media type list. So I put in an issue on life cycle to add SIFT SBOM. So originally it looked like Cyclone DX SBOM would be enough to do vulnerability matching, but the big tool, like the big open source security scanning tool that does SBOM matching is SIFT and GRIPE, and GRIPE doesn't parse Cyclone DX SBOM yet. It's going to be a while before they do that. And so we could add support for SIFT. SIFT's, kind of format for SBOM that is matchable to a vulnerability database. So you can do vulnerability matching and have your Cyclone DX SBOM. Just didn't inform. I opened an issue about it.
Does this require spec change at all?
It requires adding a media type, but an RFC explicitly says that spec changes, or it says that if we're just adding additional SBOM media types, those can go straight to spec and straight to.
Okay, so it does require spec RFC, or not RFC, spec PR rather.
I think so, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Given that we don't merge it, like it said that if you're merging the SBOM, then it requires an RFC. If you're just leaving it as it is, then it doesn't.
Yeah.
But it does require updating the spec of
Yep.
like what is supported. Cool.
The nice outcome there is soon you'll be able to point a vulnerability scanner to any build pack image and get a full list of every CVE up to the minute, that affects the image.
Do you have
really nice?
I guess I can look at it. You said it's in lifecycle, the issue you opened?
Yep.
Lifecycle recall. Okay. I'm interested to take a look at that. Cool. I think it's up to people here on the core team if you want to nix the other meeting and just continue on spec repo organization.
Let's keep going here, I think.
I think this Javier.
Yeah, I mean, I could.
A lot of people are interested in, but you're the one who opened the RFC.
Yeah, I could briefly touch on this. I think when we were talking about spec refactor at some point, we talked about alternatives to the current branching strategy and how we're maintaining the spec as a whole. And the RFC that I have right now in draft is to basically create directories for different schemas. There's some prior art behind that, and I think it brings a lot of benefit. But I did hear that at a meeting where I was absent, there was a discussion of potentially breaking up the spec repo into multiple repositories, similar to the OCI spec. I'm curious to get a feeler for, I guess, which one we want to pursue in the RFC. I don't really think I have a strong opinion either way, but I could at least formulate the RFC one way or the other. So nobody has a preference?
I the two options you're suggesting are either split it into repos or have the
A nested directory structure.
nested directory structure.
I think I have a strong preference for splitting it into more repos and then doing the versioning in each of those repos instead of trying to version it as files inside of one monorepo. I think that we want to version it as files inside of one monorepo is a signal that we really want to, and also that we've asked people to split PRs into multiple PRs that are separate into the same repo as a signal that maybe those things should be two repos. OCI also does this. They have a separate image spec and distribution spec and whatever. So it follows accepted conventions.
Sorry, so I remember a prior conversation about this, and we said, with the Git approach, the concern is when you have to make a PR that touches multiple, different components. Like, let's say these are separate things, and let's say we're submoduling it. Are we concerned now that it's going to be difficult for an outside contributor still to like contribute to something that touches, let's say platform and, another component?
We're already making them split their PRs into multiple PRs for platform and build pack APIs, for example. And so I think it's just as much work for that external contributor to make them submit two PRs to two different repos as two PRs to the same repo.
So the nested directory structure would ease that actually, right? Because we would have, the way it's proposed right now, we would have a development version. And so therefore you could create a PR for both build pack API and platform API, for instance, in one PR. So in that regard, that is the benefit that I see in putting it all in one. But again, no real strong opinions.
I guess still lean towards multiple repos. Given that they're different APIs versioned differently.
How do we link them together if they're separate repos?
They aren't linked together, right?
Yeah, they're not. I mean, they could reference each other. Like for instance, I'll tell you distribution will most likely reference to other parts of the spec, like the build pack spec. But yeah, I don't know that there's a single point of contact. Maybe as part of the migration strategy would be that the current spec repo stays as is with the README saying that, hey, these are all the new repos and it archived.
So we don't ship out a new spec anymore. We ship out different things. Is that my understanding?
I think that's been true already.
Today we ship out like when we release, say, I think a good example of this is like we released platform 07, but we did not release like build pack 07 with it, even though I think historically, since we've been making changes to both of those specs kind of during the course of the project. So we would still cut a release for that. The only kind of difference is if we do the multiple repo thing, like Steven said, those kind of tags and other things would be in different places now. But you wouldn't have like just the spec repo where you would see all the releases for everything in the spec, right? I feel like the big thing I want to see that's a bit, I think, tangential to the separate or one repos. I would like to see the spec broken up into multiple files for any individual spec. So like, I would like to see, like, if we use a directory, for instance, for build pack, that build pack could have multiple files. I think we're starting to see kind of that need with the kind of support doc file RFC. Like, I think we've probably wanted this for a while, but I feel like that particular one where like when Steve and I had kind of that discussion, like, yeah, a lot of stuff should belong in the build pack API, but I don't know if it makes sense to just continue to jam it into build pack MD. And so I know that's like one of the things that I would like to see out of this. And so instead of like a just build pack MD, you would just have like a build pack folder if it was one repo. If it's separate repos, I guess you would just have different files in that particular repo.
Yeah. I think the only other downside with multiple repos is discoverability, right? And maybe this is what Anthony was referring to, is right now it's one place for all the different components. And once you have them in separate repos, it might be harder to discover, essentially.
If we have the spec repo link out to all the different repos, does that help enough, Anthony? Or do you feel like, and I guess I'm picking on you because you work with the project, but don't have to live with all this stuff, I guess, all the time, potentially. But
no, that's a fair call, and completely. No, that makes sense. I'm always just thinking pragmatically, and to me, if you release these independently, and you can contribute in the way that was just explained, yeah, I see no problem with multiple repos. Yes, and from my perspective, my life isn't encumbered, right, by this change, because yeah, if you put it in the README somewhere, I know where to go to find the information, right, that I need.
I'm like a little worried about, I just said with the spec PR, right, for platform support for the SBOM, right? It's like, this doesn't make any sense without the corresponding build pack PR. So effectively, it's saying the platform will include these files written by build packs in this location. But if there's nothing, like, you have to go to the build pack spec to understand what those files are, right? Unless you want to, it's like, it doesn't make sense one without the other.
I mean, that's already true today though, right? Like technically, I mean, to Steven's point, right? Like technically the build pack spec is a different spec from platform spec. And so you already are pointing to different spec. It just happens to be in one repo versus two repos in that case.
And I do wonder if there's like a hidden positive or benefit there, in that it would create better decoupling within the different interfaces, so that you think of them as independent instead of trying to glob them together.
Are you still unsatisfied, Natalie?
No, not enough that I'm going to complain any further.
I don't know. Like, I guess as a maintainer of lifecycle and having to interact with the specs a lot, like, I think your opinion is pretty important here too.
I do think pushing us toward more decoupling is the way to go. Like, even knowing that I had to submit a separate PR for the build pack spec, I made some decisions in how I wrote the first PR. So that's a good thing.
I feel like, Ben, you had a lot of influence on the original structure of how all this stuff was set up. Do you have thoughts here?
Yeah, like I don't love breaking it into a bunch of different repos personally. I think keeping them close and having a complex system inside is better, simply because we haven't successfully made truly decoupled specs. I don't think we even want to, right? Which means then that having the ability to sort of flip back and forth, or having a co-located, representation of them feels good. Now, like, I'm open to an argument that says actually having a bunch of different repos is fine, because the way people shouldn't be looking in repos for this, it's where we edit them, but that's a source for like generating into web pages, right? Just Hugo, the whole thing. They sit right next to one another, complete with version numbers in a table and stuff like that. But we have enough. I think there's also a point that like we have enough problem trying to get issues opened into the right repo right now, right? Like if you want to open an issue about something in Cloud Native Build Packs, you have to kind of have an understanding of what's going on. Like, do you open it against the lifecycle? Do you open it against pack? Do you open it against whatever? And like now splitting out spec changes feels like overkill.
I think if our specifications are so interdependent on each other that we feel like we need to put them in the same repo so that we can change them in some sort of lockstep, then we have done something very wrong with the things we are specifying, if that makes sense. That
why do you think lockstep? I'm interested that you chose those words because I don't think of it that way. Right, like I think they are related and they build on top of one another and they leverage features in one another. But I don't think, I think the fact that we've had to do platform and build pack API changes every time is an anti-pattern, whether like sort of orthogonal to whether or not it's in the same repo.
I mean, you're saying that it's convenient if they're in the same repo because you can link between the two specs, right, at the same commit, right? So that implies that the things you're linking between, there's a relation between when you click on a link in one spec and you end up on a particular revision of the other spec, that there is a necessary coupling between the text of those two specifications. And I think that
I think you inserted the words "at the same commit" into my original statement. Like technically, I don't know what this looks like. If there was some way to say like latest tag, like I'd be totally okay with that as well, right? Like I don't think it necessarily means you want to be able to link between two different files on the same commit, but I do think you want to be able to say that like the distribution spec does actually leverage a particular feature with a particular heading in the name whatever spec it needs to be, build pack spec or something like that, right?
But I think the links we have right now do link on the same commit. And if you wanted to link to different commits, you'd use a fully qualified URI to a different commit that happens to be in the same repo. And at that point, isn't it, why not just have them be in separate repos instead of one parsing of one sit down parse of the specification to understand what's happening, requiring you to, jump through multiple revisions of the repository? That feels like, it's confusing.
Yeah, like I broadly don't see it. Like I don't see splitting it into multiple repositories as a significant downside. I think process-wise, I think it's actually going to be a lot heavier than it is today. But I also don't observe that there's a huge amount of advantage to it either. Like the work that we're going to do and the expense we'll pay like a year from now, we'll have paid a year from now, I don't think will have been worth the effort that we put into it.
I think there's a bunch of effort involved in keeping many revisions of each specification checked into a repo at every commit, right? Like that feels very, which I believe is the alternative that's being proposed, right? Like we're not saying keep it the way it is or split into multiple repos, it's split into multiple repos, or copy the file and recommit that back into the thing when the version changes. Or did I misunderstand that?
No, I think you're right? Like we would basically have like 03, and then when the new development version, when we make a release, the current dev version would be copied into an 04, right? And we would have that dev version continue to live forward.
So the latest version of the spec would have like, eventually 30 build pack specifications and single commit, right?
When you say a single commit, you mean on a single tree at the...
When you go to GitHub.
When you go to GitHub files.
Yeah.
I mean, if we go that far, yes. Yeah.
So Ben, between those two options, does that change your mind?
I'd say pull all those revisions out of a Git repo completely. Use Git the way Git was intended, and that is tags. That's
what we're doing now, right? And
yeah, what we're doing is painful, right? And that's what the RFC is about, and that's where this all came from.
if the pain is referring to older versions of them, then like let's render proper documentation. Let's not use Git as the place that we host this documentation. Like I don't have a problem if we want to have a Jekyll repo or like a Jekyll project that has 50 pages in it. But I think that's different than like this is friggin' Bosch all over again, right? For those of you from the CF world, this is a mistake.
It's the contributions. It's not so much the reading part. It's the contributions. For instance,
and for contributors, the only thing they care about is whatever the latest released version of these things are.
Right, which you have to get them before they create the PR. Otherwise, having them rebase it is a nightmare.
Practically, do we see that? Like we went in today and moved something from main to the distribution 03 or whatever it was. Like literally we changed a thing in a GitHub UI and no one did anything else.
I did actually. Like last week, I had to merge main into distribution 03 branch. Otherwise, the PR shows that it's a massive change with a lot of files attached to it. You could see that PR.
Yeah, but like that doesn't, like I don't think that is particularly wrong, right? If distribution has not properly kept up to date with what the repo looks like, then yeah, okay. Like the whole point was, if a PR goes in to change just the distribution spec, there's exactly one file that's a problem. So if you rebase whatever that change is out of main and on, and no other files have been changed, like that's the key here, onto another one of those branches, it doesn't show as this huge massive delta because only one change has happened. There's only one file there could be a conflict in. And it's conflicts that absolutely have to be resolved.
It's not that straightforward. And I'm trying to think about this logically, but basically, because distribution 03 is in an older, like an older commit, right? And there were a bunch of changes that occurred to main outside of the distribution file.
Mm-hmm.
If an individual, right, creates a PR off of main, and then we want to repoint the branch to put it to distribution 03, it tries to take all of main, all of the stuff that's been changed in main into the distribution 03. And that's where his PR now encompasses all the files outside of just distribution 03.
Why isn't that, so that's not done as a rebase then?
When you say, what do you mean by that?
So if you did this with a rebase, if you needed to get a PR off of main and move it on to one of these branches, and you did a git rebase to make that happen, the delta, the thing that you're rebasing, is the addition of 10 lines to one file. It does not bring 1,000 files along with it, unless those 1,000 files have been changed as part of the PR in the first place. Right.
And this is now where we have to instruct the contributor to essentially rebase onto a different branch. And that's that sort of hurdle.
So repointing is not rebasing in the GitHub UI?
No. It's basically,
I'm late for a meeting as well, so.
Yeah.
Okay.